Welcome to week 12. Thank you for joining me. Before we get on with the class, I want to remind you to email me your classroom management plan. I'll be sure to have it graded by next week. And if you haven't already sent me your instructional strategies to post in the Moodle, please do that as well. So, our agenda for tonight is to continue talking about contrasting traditional discipline methods and classroom management practices with alternatives. So last week, we talked about developmental discipline and we talked about SEL, which are considered alternatives because the emphasis is on prevention and addressing the cause of the behavior rather just on consequences and punishing students. We also mentioned ISS last week, in school suspension, which we're going to address a little bit more tonight. So specifically, we're going to address referrals, detentions, and suspensions, which are very traditional practices that are commonly used in schools today. We will also talk about restorative justice, which is considered an alternative, and a subset of SEL programs, social emotional learnings. And we will also talk about mindfulness. Some schools use mindfulness practice in conjunction with SEL, and again, it's actually a part of the SEL program. The Open Circle program absolutely has a small piece of mindfulness in it, but some programs do it on a regular basis as well. And we're going to finish off talking about building relationships, which is really something we've been talking about all semester. That when we emphasize building relationships with students, we have less discipline problems and we have more motivated students. I will say that these non-traditional approaches that we talk about are strategies that you can implement in your classrooms, even if your school or your district does not embrace them or embrace an SEL approach. They're definitely strategies that you can do and you can have an impact with your students. So, let's begin with disciplinary referrals. So, referrals are used for a couple of reasons. One, they're used when teachers want an administrator's help with discipline. When you discipline a student in your own classroom, there is no need for a disciplinary referral. However, when you ask for help, the school will ask that you write a referral. So another purpose is to collect data on discipline problems school-wide. Schools must report violent incidents to the state on a yearly basis, so it's important that they collect data on certainly very serious infractions and violent behavior. But another reason, ideally, is that a school should be examining the trends of these disciplinary problems, hopefully with the purpose of reducing misbehavior, trying to see where the patterns are and trying to address them. That is not always the case, and usually it's just collecting data. Discipline referrals document, in addition to the problem, but when and how to intervene. So it explains what the consequence will be, often a punishment, and most likely, in most cases, it's detentions and suspensions, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. So how often are students getting disciplinary referrals? Well, we know that there's tremendous variation between schools, even schools within a district, and I think that's why some of you hadn't really heard about referrals. My guess is you're in high-performing schools that don't use referrals excessively. But one of the some research found that disciplinary referrals in the elementary school ranged from 10% to 39% of students getting at least one referral during the school year. Those numbers are higher in the upper grades within elementary school, and the amounts are double by the time we get to middle school. So we're seeing a dramatic increase in the number of referrals in middle schools. What's also, I think, kind of interesting is that 70% of teachers surveyed had written at least 1 to 5 referrals in a school year, but only 6% have written 25 or more referrals. So what I would want to do is I would want to target those 6% of teachers and see what's going on, because clearly they don't have the skills and means or attitude and desire to manage students within their classrooms. I think I've said it before, it is always desirable to handle it yourself rather than send the student out for an assistant principal or a dean to handle it, because you're sending the message that you can't handle it. But of course, you certainly should use referrals for serious infractions and when you do need help. And it's fair that you do need help. I don't expect you to always be able to handle everything yourself, but I do believe if you engage in the alternative strategies that we talk about, you will have less need to refer students out for misbehavior. So let's take a look at an example of a real referral. I know this is kind of hard to see, so I'm going to highlight a few things about this referral. One thing you will notice is that it's digital. Most schools that I work with have some sort of online platform for referrals. This particular one, it got cut off on the top, is a School Tool. Another common database that schools use is eSchool. So these databases keep track of everything. They keep track of contact information with the families. They keep information on IEPs, just general data about the students. But referrals and disciplinary issues are included in this as well. So if you can take a little look at lovely John, who is in fourth grade. He's 9 years old. What you can see, I've redacted all the personal information. What you can see on the side, so just some data, and he does not have an IEP. And that's important information. Now, what happens with the referral is the teacher completes the referral. So the teacher wrote this scenario down here about that the teacher was reprimanding another student, and John started mouthing off at me. He told me I was looking at the other student when I should have been yelling at him. Interesting. Seems like John was trying to take the pressure off of another kid and the focus on him. As I went to my desk, he quickly escalated with me, always trying to get that last word in instead of following directions to be quiet. It was at that time that Miss S called the office. Obviously, there's 2 teachers in this classroom. And after looking away for just a moment to talk to Miss S, we looked back and John had left the room. We did not let him leave the room. So the teacher fills this out online, and then it is processed, in this case, by the school dean. And the dean made the determination that he would receive detention, lunch detention and recess detention. And that, if you can see on the bottom, is for 3 days. So 3 days of lunch and recess detention was the consequence. What's interesting, now, funny or not so funny. There's somewhere on here where the teacher is asked, has this ever happened before? And the teacher said no. Oh, also, right, so the teacher said no. If you look toward underneath the text, it says, has this behavior occurred before? It says no. The child does not have an FBA, functional behavior analysis. Reason for referral: insubordination, disrespect, leaving the room without permission. What have you done to date? What has the teacher done? Warn and lecture? Yes. Special seating? Yes. Taking time out to the office? Yes. Classroom detention? Yes. Counselor contact? No. Parent contact? Yes. So this teacher says it hasn't happened before, yet all these things are in place. And now if we take a look at this student's disciplinary history over the school year, we will see that he has had 20 referrals so far for this during this school year. This is just from September through the beginning of April. It includes a variety of disruptions, one threat where he received detention, lots of insubordination where he got lunch detention, and a little physical contact. So lots of detentions, a few warnings in the beginning. So what's really important that seems so glaring to me is he keeps getting referrals, he keeps getting detentions, and the behavior persists. This is not a pattern we want to fall into. We want to, if you try something once or twice and the behavior persists, you need to try something else. This strategy is not working. So let's move on to detention. So detention, as you probably know, maybe from movies, The Breakfast Club, even Hairspray had a detention classroom. Students are expected to sit quietly in classrooms after school. That is your classic detention. Sometimes it is done during lunchtime. Maybe because the student can't stay after. You can't just hold a student without contacting the parent and informing them, and a parent could say the child cannot stay. A parent can say, I need my child at home, and a parent can deny that detention. So sometimes schools do it during lunch and recess to avoid the after school. You always have to contact families. Some teachers have detention in their own classroom, but more often than not, they don't do that because that means the teacher has to give up his or her lunchtime or after school time. So most schools have a group detention, and teachers will rotate detention duty so that the children are all in one place and somebody supervises them. And as I suggested, most of the time they're told to sit quietly. Sometimes they are given work to do. Sometimes but I would say most of the time it is pretty unproductive work, but they could be doing extra work. Sometimes they are told to write up. Sometimes schools have a form that a student has to fill out to say why he was in detention and pretty much why he'll never do it again. So it's, in my opinion, a form of forced apology and writing as punishment, which is definitely not what I want to do. I want to make writing fun and exciting, which is hard for a lot of kids. So I certainly do not want to use punishment as writing as a punishment. Not surprisingly, research has found detention is not a deterrent to future misbehavior. Yet we use it over and over and over and over again. So it is. It's just a lot of times we use discipline strategies just because that's all we know, or that's because it's been in place for so long we can't think out of the box. But there's no research to show that it is a detention. In fact, other research shows that 7th grade students who get detention are more likely to be held back, and to drop out and to be involved in a crime. So I'm not saying if you give a child a detention, these things are going to happen. But when we have a pattern of detention used as the punishment, we know we're not addressing an underlying problem. And so that's not effective. Now, I think it's perfectly fine for a teacher to say, I'd like you to stay in with me, and it could be effective. Detention could have the possibility of being more effective if it's used as an opportunity for dialogue and a chance to talk to the student and say, hey, what's going on? How can I help you? What can you do to make it better? As opposed to it really being a punitive punishment. Punitive punishments do not work. But having a dialogue one-on-one with a student could be effective. Or if the detention was run by a social worker, and the social worker used detention not as an opportunity to sit and be quiet, but as an opportunity to sit and talk in a group about the impact of their behavior and trying to reflect and find the cause of it, then this kind of so-called detention could be more effective. But in its strict form, it doesn't work, yet it is ubiquitous in schools. Another strategy that is quite common is suspending students. So let's start with out-of-school suspension, where the student basically has to stay away from school for 1 to 3 days, depending on the schools. I believe after 3 days of suspension, you have to have a hearing in the district. And it certainly is very complicated. If you have a student with an IEP, then you have to have a manifestation meeting where you have to determine that the cause of the behavior was not related to the student's IEP. You cannot suspend a student with an IEP for behavior that the student cannot control. So that often happens. But, suspensions are quite common, and they have increased dramatically since the 1990s, when schools have implemented a policy called zero tolerance. So zero tolerance means we have no tolerance for misbehavior. You misbehave, you're out. And this concept of zero tolerance is very much a criminal justice model, where we take children's misbehavior in school, either not doing your work or mouthing off or not following directions or possibly getting into a fight, and we're basically criminalizing that behavior. Another piece of this zero tolerance is having police officers in schools. Now, you won't have that in high-performing schools, but in schools where there's a large number of poor children who struggle, police officers, who are called SROs, school resource officers, are very common. They're there for security, as most people will say, but they're also there when teachers call the SRO for help. So a misbehavior, you're not just calling the dean in many cases, you're now calling a police officer to deal with children, which sends a very, very different message. So just in terms of some data, we know that almost 3 million students a year are suspended, receive out-of-school suspensions. And if you just look at the data, you can see that the numbers are considerably higher for Black students, students with disabilities, for Latino students, for English language learners. So, we've talked about the discriminatory practices we have in corporal punishment, but it is also true for suspensions as well. So in terms of benefits, schools might, teachers may say it's great because the student who challenges me is not here today. I had a great day today because that student is not here. So teachers may report it's great, it works, but really removing a struggling student shows it actually hurts the students in the long run because the student is missing school. So it's not a great strategy. And once again, it is used all the time. So I want to give you an example here. When I was a principal of a school, the data that you're seeing here, the blue, are the suspensions in the year before I came in. And as you can see, from September through May in 2012-13 school year, there were 44 students suspended, all out-of-school suspensions. The following year, when I came on board, there was one suspension, and that was an in-school suspension. So an in-school suspension is much more desirable than an out-of-school suspension, because you may guess that out-of-school suspension, first of all, it punishes the parent who may need who may need to take off of work to be home with a student, or the parent isn't there and the student is basically watching TV. It's a day off. So repeat offenders, students that get lots of suspensions, sometimes they act out because they want to be suspended. So in-school suspension is a different story, and we talked about an ISS room where kids are sent there throughout the day. That's not what happened here. What I did with the one student who was grossly inappropriate and wrote a disgusting picture that was frightening and threatening to a teacher. Not threatening to hurt, but it was sexually inappropriate, and the teacher was very, very uncomfortable with this. So I gave this student 3 days of in-school suspension, and what that meant is I had a certified teacher sit with this student for 3 days, and this student learned for 3 days. So while the student was removed from the class, and the teacher definitely needed that student to be out for a couple of days, and a message was sent to the student that this was not okay, the student continued to learn, and we didn't impact the learning. That is required, by the way, for students with IEPs. Actually, the law is even an out-of-school suspension, you have to provide an instructor. There's home instructors. Most schools don't do it, but really a student with an IEP should never be suspended without education. I thought that should also pertain to this particular student. So, as you can see, there was only that one in-school suspension. And you may say, well, what did you do instead? Because you can't just say, I'm not going to suspend and not have something else in place, because misbehavior doesn't just go away. So what was, in addition to stopping this suspension epidemic, which I felt, was implementing developmental discipline. So teachers were trained in it, and I worked collaboratively with my school social worker and psychologist, so we kind of revamped some of the traditional strategies of punishment, and we developed a little psychosocial team where we brainstormed on a daily basis about the problems that were happening with the kids, and the goal was, of course, providing more support to the students and preventing rather than punitive punishment. At the same time, we implemented Open Circle, an SEL program, and that had a great benefit. Another kind of cool thing that I did was I went into every single class, and there were, forget how many classes, but 550 students in the school, and pre-K through 6, and I went into every class and I read the book, What Does Peace Feel Like? It's a really cool book by V. Radunsky. What Does Peace Feel Like? And the goal was, the book basically asked children around the world how they experience peace through their senses. So the kids talked about how they see peace, how they hear peace, how they smell peace, and then we did a bunch of follow-up activities, grade-level activities. Every single grade participated in talking about their definition of peace, how they experience peace through the senses. So the concept of peace was something that was pervasive. I used the peace signal to get students' attention in large groups. We just frequently talked about the goal of having peace in our community. We also had a teacher who developed a play that was an anti-bullying play. So it was an opportunity for students to reenact a situation where there was bullying and to talk about positive outcomes. The entire school had a chance to see this play. And again, and after the play, every student in the school, from pre-K through 6, we had different versions, took an anti-bullying pledge. So it wasn't just something they did once and we put up on the wall. It was something that we continued to talk about what that meant in those social skills groups and in other times individual conversations with students. So what we did was transform the culture of the school, not just stop detention. So on the in the realm of alternative ways to handle discipline transforming schools, I'd like to talk about restorative justice. The aim of restorative justice practices is to develop community and to manage conflict and tensions by repairing harm and building relationships. So, I see there's a quote I didn't put at the front. There's a mistake. Sorry about that. Anyway, so you see some commonalities. This definition, by the way, came from the Internal Institute for Restorative Practices. So in this definition, we see building relationships, that theme again, which goes hand in hand with SEL and with developmental discipline. But we're talking about repairing the harm that was done. So that is something that we did talk about when we talked about the apology of action. Rather than getting kids to apologize, we ask kids to think about how they can repair the damage they did. So that's a great parallel or similarity that we've talked about. So restorative justice, how it differs from just any old SEL. I don't mean any old, that's bad, but how it's more specific than a general SEL program is because, that should have come in one at a time, students talk through conflicts to find the root cause. And there are formal dialogues and peace circles. Let's talk about peace circles for a minute. So you have a good sense now of what Open Circle is, an SEL program. The 4 R's is another opportunity for kids to sit in a circle. So what is a peace circle per se? So peace circles are based on Native American practice that has been around for eons to manage conflicts. So we come together when there's a problem, but we also come together as a preventative on a regular basis. In a peace circle, there is a circle keeper who leads the group. The students sit in a circle without any furniture in between them. There is always a centerpiece on the floor, which creates a central focus for students. And again, we're talking about peace circles here. There is always an opening ceremony where we kind of set the tone for what we're going into, and that opening ceremony could be a poem, it could be a quote, it could be a song. It's some sort of way to change our regular world into our sacred space of a peace circle. There's, of course, dialogue, and there's always a talking stick that goes around, a talking piece. So some object that is only the person who has the object can talk. That's a great strategy to use anytime in a classroom. So that gets passed around, and that keeps people from calling out and interrupting. You can't talk if you don't have the object that's selected as a speaking piece. And then we have a closing ceremony, which reaffirms what we've just talked about and accomplished, and reminds us to bring this kind of peace and strategies that we've talked about into our regular world. So it's really kind of nice. It's just a slight variation on it's a part of SEL, but specifically there are programs that call themselves peace programs. And the peer mediation, that is a specific piece of restorative justice. So when a student misbehaves, rather than the traditional of either the teacher disciplining the child or calling for help with a referral and the administrator deals with the child, we form a peer mediation circle, not a whole group. It'd be a few students at a time who are selected to be the mediators. They would be trained in how to get to the cause of the conflict and come up with an appropriate intervention or action. So students have an integral role in managing the community and the classes. Restorative justice programs work best when they are used in collaboration with an SEL programs that focus on communication skills and self-regulation skills and respect and so on. So sometimes it's just a separate piece and we have peer mediation. But if we have a comprehensive SEL program with formal dialogue and peace circles, then we see this being extremely beneficial. So programs that use restorative justice are basically shifting. So this is a nice chart that shows the shift from the traditional to what a restorative school and classroom is like. So shift number one is thinking about, in a traditional setting, troublesome behavior is considered the student's fault. It's the failure of the students. That's exactly what we do. The student acts out all the time. He's bad. He's a problem student. I can't deal with her. Or the problem with the teacher for failing somehow. In a restorative justice classroom, we say troublesome behavior, misbehavior is inevitable. It's normal. It's to be expected. That's healthy. It's also an opportunity for growth and learning, not just for the student who acts out, but for the whole community. So let's not think about misbehavior as something terrible. Let's address it in a positive way. The second shift is from an authoritarian or punitive approach. Traditional discipline, which we know breeds resentment, alienation, and shame. And we know it's often not effective, to a restorative school which builds empathy and builds responsibility and builds and restores relationships. The third shift in a restorative school is from the external locus of control, which we've talked about before, where the teacher is the one in charge of the discipline, or the administration is in charge of doling out the punishment, to moving that internal locus control to the student and students. So as you can imagine, the impact is quite positive. Research shows that there is a large reduction in disciplinary referrals. We don't need them anymore because we have a system for managing, for preventing and for managing problems when they come up. A drastic reduction in suspensions and expulsions, as you would guess. And because of that, we have a reduction in the loss of instructional time. Programs that are spending a lot of time correcting behavior, the whole class loses instructional time. And certainly students who are in detention and suspension, they lose a lot of instructional time. We see an increase in teacher morale, an increase in teacher retention, and an increase in academic outcomes, as you can imagine. So let's take a look at an example of restorative justice in an elementary school.
Before I started doing circles in my class, I found it very difficult to start the academic day. Students had things that they wanted to share that had happened with them, things they were concerned about, and I had a very long line of about 25 to 30 students every morning wanting to share personal time with me, it made it absolutely impossible to start the academic day. After the presentation of circles in our staff development, I knew that would be the best way to have each student share and be heard in the class. Here at Glenview, every teacher holds circles for classroom management, for resolving conflicts, and also to involve students in activities. Every day, I begin with mindfulness to really get the students focused and centered and ready for learning. I'm going to need you to either close your eyes or to look gently at the ground. The next thing I do in circle is a check-in with a scale from 1 to 5. This allows me to assess whether or not they're ready to learn. Okay, I'm a 5, and I have a lot of things I need to get done today, but I'm looking forward to getting them done. Would anyone else like to share why you're a 5 today?
Today I'm a 5 because I can't wait for Spirit Week. I'm a 1 because my head still hurts from Sunday.
In order to keep order in a circle, we use a talking piece, which is a symbolic piece to signify who has the floor, who's able to speak. At the beginning of the year, I ask the students what topics they feel as a class we need to discuss. The students write the topics and we place them in the cup. Our next topic is going to be about stop bullying. How can you stop bullying?
But I think since most bullies bully through pain, you can try to see if you can help or make them feel better. If you see someone getting bullied, stand up for that person and tell the bully firmly and strong to stop bullying.
I like the idea of not being a bystander, because that's somewhat being part of the bullying process. If you see it happening and you don't say anything. But it takes a lot of bravery, a lot of courage to say, hey, that's not right. As part of a program called Restorative Justice, circles are also used to resolve conflicts that come up during the school day.
Sometimes at recess, Sydney and Hermione would come over and just start talking about us and saying mean things about Janae.
Is it your job to make Janae's job at school hard? So you choose to either be the bully that you're being or to be someone's ally and make their choice.
So, as you can see from this example, this teacher uses peace circles with the talking piece. She also integrates mindfulness, which we're going to talk about in a moment, and as well as mediation. That particular example was an adult-led peer mediation because you just don't have students work it out on their own. You're teaching them how to do that. So hopefully you feel a little inspired by that example. Now we're going to move on to mindfulness. So, mindfulness is basically means we're learning to direct one's attention to the present, to be in the moment, learning to be conscious of how we feel now, and learning to accept what we feel and how we feel. Now, this is not easy. As someone who does practice yoga and mindfulness and meditation, this is really, really tough. But it's a process, and it works when you practice it, and you learn to be forgiving when your mind goes somewhere else. It involves breathing. That's a central piece of mindfulness. This breathing is what helps us concentrate. It allows us to clear our minds and to think. Often it involves some form of movement. It could be yoga movements. It could be other kinds of peaceful poses, and meditation. Is basically stilling your mind, quieting your mind, and just allowing yourself to feel now. So there are different kinds of breathing exercises. The most common one that we teach is either called a cleansing breath or a yoga breath, where you breathe in slowly through your mouth, through your nose, as slowly and controlled as possible, and slowly and controlled you breathe out through your mouth. That's one type of breath. As I said, there's many different variations of this, but we can teach even preschool students how to use their breath to still their mind and to be in the moment. I think we saw a little bit of that in the SEL video, where we did balloon breathing, where students imagine that they had a balloon in their belly that's getting bigger and smaller, or we call it belly breathing or straw breathing. So we can find creative ways to teach students to do this even in the younger grades. We know that research shows us that mindfulness decreases depression, it decreases anxiety, stress, and pain, and mindfulness practice increases memory, focus, impulse control, happiness, and empathy. So it seems like a really great strategy, and in fact, mindfulness practice is becoming very popular in schools. Sometimes phys ed teachers are using it, and sometimes teachers begin their day with it. So actually, mindfulness can be used proactively or reactively. So proactively would mean we build it into our daily routine. We do it every morning, or we do it once a week, or we do it at the end of the day. Somehow you decide how to do that on a regular basis, and we're basically teaching students strategies that they can use throughout the day and throughout their lives to calm down and to manage their challenges more readily and easily. Mindfulness can also be used reactively. We're now seeing schools that have, instead of ISS classes, ISS rooms, or detention rooms, they now have mindfulness or meditation rooms. So a student who needs to be removed from the classroom, a student who's struggling, goes to the mindfulness room, not as a punishment, but as a way to calm down, get centered, get focused, and hopefully get back to class as quickly as possible. If you do not practice mindfulness or yoga, you can find resources online. There are guided classes that just do it for the students. So if that's not something you would feel comfortable leading, you can easily find it either on certainly on iTunes or any kind of music program. You can search for guided meditations, and again, you can find them on the internet as well. So that brings us to building relationships, which really has been a central piece of all these alternatives. And I do think everything we do, whether we're talking about developmental discipline, SEL, restorative justice, mindfulness, all of these have a goal or a consequence, building positive relationships between students and teachers, between students, and certainly between adults. We know that when we build relationships with students, when we make this active attempt to get to know them, to form positive relationships rather than just teach them, it increases their motivation and their academic achievement. We know that. We know that is particularly true with students of color. Students who are high risk, like students with special needs, students who are immigrants, so students who are kind of on having an additional challenge. When we build a relationship with them, we get them to want to learn. And we know that building relationships with them improves the behavior. If they respect you and feel you respect them, then they want to do the right thing. They don't want to make you upset. They don't want to disappoint you. So here are some general strategies. Certainly getting to know students on a personal level. I'm sure that happens naturally, but this is more than just learning about their learning styles or the learning profiles, which is extremely important for academics, but we want to go out of our way to find out what they like, what their preferences are, what they're interested in, what kind of music they like, what kind of movies they like. Then you have a way to connect because you have an entry point in having conversations about more difficult things. You want to be sure to listen to your students. I think that's something we as teachers don't do very well. I think we as teachers tend to talk at students. We ask questions of them, but we're looking for certain answers. I'm suggesting that we listen to what they really have to say, give them a voice. Could be opinions about, options about assignments, not unlimited choices. Could be simple choices, simple options that work for you. But the more we give them options and hear what they want to do, the more they will feel good about the relationship and about the learning environment. We want to give them a chance to express their feelings without judgment and without shutting them down. We tend to do that to kids. When kids say, I hate that, or I hate you, or I'm stupid, we say, don't say that. Let's let them say it, but let's help them find a solution to these feelings, a new path, rather than just feeling bad. We certainly want to treat children respectfully. So we want to be very, very careful not to say things that embarrass or shame them. We don't always do that on purpose. I don't know too many teachers who purposely want to shame kids or make them feel badly. Just we do it because we're not really cognizant. We're not really conscious of the impact of the words we use. So I'm asking that you think about your words. Reflect. That's what the reflection piece is about. Reflect on the words you use, the tone you use. And I think simultaneously we need to have high expectations for students. I don't think building relationship is just being that nice teacher who's always having fun. You're there to teach them. So I want you to challenge them with rigorous activities, rigorous learning opportunities, but you also are there to provide the support that makes it possible for them to be successful. So you provide the scaffolds, you provide the instructional strategies that will make them successful, and you encourage them in a genuine way. But again, that bar is set high. We're not lowering the bar. We're raising the bar, but making it possible for them to succeed. So that's really important. And the last piece that I want to say is, I think it's good to show students you're vulnerable. It's good to say, I made a mistake. It's good to say, I'm not very good at this, and I need your help sometimes, or I need other people's help. If you show that you are not this perfect teacher who went to school and who's there to teach them, but show that you are a human who has strengths and weaknesses, who has feelings, then the students will connect with you and they will know that your communications are genuine. Now, I'm not saying share a lot of personal information. Some teachers share too much personal information. I'm not saying that. Don't share your long personal stories. Don't share your hardships, but share little pieces that could be used to motivate students or help them connect. So, that is it for tonight. I hope you feel that you have more and more strategies for responding to your students in positive ways, in proactive ways. When we meet again next week, we will continue talking about strategies to support our students to be successful. Thank you very much and good night.